So let me tell you about the Galactic Survival Championship, which is basically what happens when you give a bunch of aliens with too much money and not enough common sense access to reality television. For 3,000 years, this has been the most prestigious endurance competition in known space. We're talking about species that can breathe methane, eat radiation, and photosynthesize their own lunch, competing to see who can survive the longest on the most inhospitable rock the galaxy has to offer. The record, and I want you to appreciate this, is 40 days. 40 whole days set by Gorath the Unyielding, a Vulcarian whose species literally evolved in lava pools and considers room temperature to be Arctic conditions. This record has stood for 200 years. Civilizations have risen and fallen in less time than people have spent trying to beat Gorath's record. Now, the championship has rules, obviously. Minimal supplies, no technology beyond basic tools, no outside contact, one planet, one timer, and whatever willpower you can scrape together. Contestants come from every corner of the galaxy, each one representing their species' ultimate survival capabilities. It's a big deal. Planets declare holidays when their representative competes. There are betting pools that span star systems. So naturally, when Earth got its invitation to participate after being discovered and joining the Galactic Council, humanity did what it does best. We completely misunderstood the assignment. Enter Edith Kowalski, age 67, from Billings, Montana, grandmother of 5, retired postal worker. Hobbies include quilting, aggressive bargain hunting, and telling people exactly what she thinks of their life choices without being asked. Edith signed up because she thought she was entering a raffle for a cruise to the Bahamas. In her defense, the translation software did render Galactic Survival Championship as premium tropical experience, and nobody bothered to double-check until after the registration closed. By the time anyone realized the mistake, Edith had legally secured Earth's slot in the competition, and Galactic law is very clear about registration. No takesies backsies. The council was horrified. Earth's representatives tried to explain that humans were new to space, and perhaps not ready for this level of competition. Could we maybe sit this one out and try again in a century or two when we had a better understanding of what we'd gotten ourselves into? The other species, and I'm not going to lie, they found this hilarious. Here's humanity, barely figured out faster than light travel, and they're sending what they kept calling a, quote, fragile elder, unquote, to compete against the galaxy's most extreme survival specialists. The general consensus was that this would be a brief and embarrassing chapter in Earth's galactic debut. Edith, for her part, showed up to the pre-competition briefing in a sensible windbreaker, cargo pants with more pockets than any garment has a right to have, and walking shoes she'd broken in over the course of 15 years. She listened to the orientation, nodded occasionally, and asked exactly one question. Is there Wi-Fi? There was not. She shrugged, said that was fine. She'd lived without internet before and survived just fine. And could someone point her to the bathroom because the shuttle ride had been 3 hours long and she was 67 years old? Thank you very much. The hosts, two perfectly polished Andromedans named Rixel and Plune who'd been commentating this championship for 30 years, exchanged what I can only describe as deeply concerned looks. This was going to be a disaster. They could already see the headlines. Human elder perishes in day 1. Earth withdraws from galactic events in shame. Humanity questions why they ever left their solar system. But again, the rules were the rules, and Edith had signed the waiver, which she'd read thoroughly and even corrected a grammatical error in Section 7 before signing. So ready or not, humanity was about to make its mark on the Galactic Survival Championship. Spoiler alert, they were not ready, but not in the way they thought. Let me introduce you to the competition, because this lineup was genuinely impressive if you're into that sort of thing. First up, Thornak the Enduring, a Vulcarian like the legendary Gorath himself, 8 feet tall, skin like cooled magma, and a personality to match. Thornak could eat rocks. Not like small pebbles for fun. I mean full-on boulders for breakfast. His species evolved in volcanic vents and thought oxygen was spicy. He'd been training for this competition for 15 years and had the kind of confidence that comes from knowing your species literally holds the record. Then we had Glezix the Infinite, an Aquarian who looked like someone had given a jellyfish delusions of grandeur and a gym membership. Glezix could enter a hibernation state that slowed his metabolism to practically nothing. His species once had a member survive in space for 3 years by just deciding to take a nap. 3 years. In the vacuum of space. And they woke up cranky about missing breakfast. And finally, Vax the Eternal, a crystalline being who was essentially a sentient rock formation with opinions. Vax didn't technically need food. or water, or air, really. He absorbed ambient energy from his surroundings and could go indefinitely as long as there was literally any heat or light anywhere nearby. The bookies had him as the favorite, which honestly seemed like cheating, but apparently the rules allowed it. These three had spent months preparing. Special diets, mental conditioning, meditation retreats on moons with barely any atmosphere. This was their lives, their purpose, their chance at glory. And then there was Edith, who'd packed a day pack with hard candies, a Ziploc bag of mystery jerky, 3 pairs of reading glasses because she always loses them, and a paperback romance novel just in case things got dull. The planet they'd chosen was Crag 7, which was essentially what would happen if you took all the worst parts of every environment and stuck them on one rock. Freezing nights, scorching days, thin atmosphere, barely any water, and soil so nutrient-poor that calling it dirt felt generous. The terrain was mostly jagged rocks, sparse vegetation that looked angry about existing, and dust. So much dust. Rixel, the lead commentator, stood before the assembled competitors with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd been practicing this speech in the mirror. Welcome, champions, to the 400th Galactic Survival Championship. You will be transported to Crag 7 with only basic supplies. 1 thermal blanket, 1 canteen, 1 survival knife. The competitor who lasts the longest claims victory and eternal glory for their species. Thornak cracked his rocky knuckles. Glezix rippled with determination. Vax literally glowed with confidence. Edith raised her hand. Excuse me, hon, but is there wildlife? Because I saw something in the briefing packet about local fauna, and I want to know if we're talking squirrels or bears here. Plune, the co-host, consulted his datapad. There are small lizard-like creatures, some insects, and a bird analog species. Nothing dangerous to beings of your size. Edith nodded thoughtfully. So squirrels. Got it. Nobody knew what to do with that. Thornak leaned over, his voice like grinding boulders. Human. The record is 40 days. 40. My ancestor Gorath set this record through pure Vulcarian will. What is your species' record for survival in harsh conditions? Edith looked up at him. And I mean really up because she was 5'4" and he was 8 feet of living igneous rock. Well, I'm not sure about official records, but I did 6 months solo in a cabin in the Montana wilderness back in '73. Just me, a wood stove, and whatever I could hunt or grow. Did it for fun, really. Needed some quiet time after my mother-in-law visited for Easter and stayed through Thanksgiving. There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone says something so absurd that reality needs a moment to process it. Glezix burbled in confusion. You survived alone for 6 of your Earth months? For recreation? Well, I wouldn't call it recreation exactly. More like necessary stress relief. But sure, let's go with that. Vax's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement or concern. Honestly, it was hard to tell. Your species chooses isolation in hostile environments as a leisure activity? Edith shrugged. Some people do crosswords. I had a vegetable garden and a lot of time to think. Really, it's not that complicated. Thornak laughed, a sound like an avalanche having a good time. This will be entertaining. Brief, but entertaining. And with that, they were transported to Crag 7, where the galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating grandmas who've survived Montana winters. Raised 5 kids on a postal worker's salary, and once told a bear to get off her porch with such authority that it actually left. Day 1 started exactly how you'd expect. Thornak immediately began surveying the terrain for optimal mineral deposits, using techniques passed down through generations of Vulcarian survivors. Glezix established a moisture collection system using his natural biological abilities. Vax positioned himself on a high ridge to maximize solar absorption and began what I can only describe as aggressive meditation. Edith looked around, said, picked a spot near a cluster of scraggly plants, and started unpacking. Now, the thing about survival experts is they tend to overcomplicate things. They've got strategies and contingencies and backup plans for their backup plans. Edith had raised 5 children in a house with 1 bathroom and a furnace that broke down every winter like clockwork. She didn't need strategies. She had spite and common sense, which frankly is a more powerful combination than most people realize. First thing she did was build a shelter, and not the kind of ramshackle lean-to you'd expect. No. Edith apparently spent the 1970s watching every single PBS home improvement show ever broadcast, and she retained all of it. She found flat rocks, stacked them into a wind barrier, used smaller stones to create drainage channels, and fashioned a roof frame from the sturdiest dead branches she could find. By sunset on day 1, she had something that looked less like a survival shelter and more like a tiny studio apartment. Rixel and Plune, watching from the broadcast station, were baffled. Is she arranging decorative rocks?" Plune asked, zooming in on Edith's campsite. "I think those are for drainage," Rixel replied slowly. "But that pattern does look intentionally aesthetic." Day 3. Edith started a fire using the old-fashioned method of friction and dried plant matter, then spent an hour arranging rocks around it in a specific formation. Thornak, passing by on a mineral survey, stopped to watch. "Human, what are you doing?" "Making a fire ring, dear. Can't have sparks jumping around willy-nilly. That's how you burn down forests." "There are no forests here. Not with that attitude there aren't. Now shoo. You're blocking my light." By day 5, Edith had identified which of the local plants were edible, which was genuinely impressive because the planet's botanical database was extremely limited. She just tasted things, tiny amounts, waited to see if she got sick. It was the kind of reckless frontier logic that should not have worked, but absolutely did, because apparently Edith's generation had cast-iron stomachs and immune systems built by drinking from garden hoses. She started a small garden. And yes, I know what you're thinking. A garden? On a survival competition? On a planet with terrible soil? But Edith had composted her kitchen scraps for 40 years and knew more about soil amendment than most agricultural scientists. She found a spot with slightly better drainage, cleared rocks, mixed in ash from her fire, and planted seeds from some of the edible plants she'd found. Day 7. Galactic discovered her watering the garden using a water filtration system she'd built from her canteen, some hollow plant stems, and charcoal she'd made herself. He stared for a full minute. "You are cultivating vegetation? Well, I'm not going to eat that jerky forever. Do you know how much sodium is in preserved meat? My doctor would have a fit. This is a survival competition, not agricultural exhibition. Honey, survival is agriculture. How do you think your ancestors made it past the hunter-gatherer phase?" Edith paused, squinting at him. "Do your people have an agricultural phase? Or are you one of those species that just sort of photosynthesizes?" Galactic burbled in what might have been indignation and floated away. By day 10, the Galactic audience was starting to notice something weird. Thornak was surviving, as expected, through sheer Vulcarian toughness. Vax was meditating and absorbing energy, as predicted. Galactic was managing through careful hibernation cycles, right on schedule. And Edith was thriving. Not just surviving, thriving. She'd woven a basket from plant fibers. She'd made a broom to keep her shelter tidy. She'd fashioned a crude but functional rocking chair from bent branches, and was sitting in it every evening, watching the sunset like she was on her front porch back in Billings. On day 12, the camera drones caught her knitting. She'd apparently unraveled part of her thermal blanket, and was knitting it into a more efficient shawl design with needles she'd carved from bone after catching and eating one of the local bird lizards. Thornak walked past, saw this, and just stopped. "Are those clicking sticks?" "Knitting needles. I'm making a shawl. The nights are chilly, and that blanket they gave us has terrible insulation properties. No offense to whoever designed them, but my grandmother could have done better and she lost 2 fingers in a farming accident. You are crafting clothing on a survival planet. For comfort? What else am I supposed to do? Sit around and be miserable? That's just poor planning, sweetheart." Thornak had no response to this. What do you say to someone who's turned a Death World survival challenge into what appeared to be a moderately inconvenient camping trip? By day 15, Edith's garden was actually producing food. Small amounts, sure, but actual fresh vegetables on a planet where most species would be struggling to find water. She'd also befriended one of the local bird lizards by leaving out scraps of food, and it had started hanging around her camp like a weird scaly chicken. The broadcast ratings were climbing. People across the galaxy were tuning in, not to watch the dramatic struggle of elite competitors pushing their limits, but to watch a human grandmother essentially homestead on a wasteland planet, while humming what the translation software could only render as ancient human folk melody. Rixel turned to Plune in the commentary booth. "I don't understand what we're witnessing." Plune checked his notes, then checked them again. "Neither do I. But 17 billion people are watching, and our social media numbers have never been higher. Should we be concerned? About what? That she's comfortable? That she's happy? That she appears to be doing better than competitors with biological advantages specifically evolved for this? Yes, all of that, exactly all of that." On day 15, Edith watered her garden, fed her bird lizard friend, and settled into her rocking chair with her knitting. Somewhere in the distance, Thornak was eating rocks and contemplating his life choices. Glezix was entering his third hibernation cycle. Vax was still meditating on his ridge, and Edith was wondering if she had enough time to finish this shawl before the competition ended, because her granddaughter's birthday was coming up and this would make a lovely gift. Day 16 was when things started to fall apart for the competition. And by things, I mean the competitors. Glezix was the first to crack, which surprised exactly no one who'd been paying attention. See, Aquarians are biologically impressive, sure, but they're also deeply social creatures. They live in massive underwater cities with thousands of their kind. Constant communication, shared thoughts, the works. Glezix had been alone for 16 days on a rock with 3 other beings who didn't speak his language particularly well, and he was losing it. The camera drones found him on day 18 having what can only be described as an emotional breakdown, floating in circles and making sounds that the translation software rendered as, "I miss my podmates. I miss my bioluminescent garden. I miss having someone to share meal thoughts with. This is awful. Why did I think I could do this? My mother was right. I should have become an accountant." He tapped out on day 19. Edith waved goodbye to him from her rocking chair and offered him some of her vegetables for the road. He took them, cried a little more, and teleported back to the station where he immediately called his mother to apologize for not visiting more often. Thornak lasted longer, but day 27 did him in. And it wasn't even the planet that beat him. It was dietary requirements. See, Vulcarians eat rocks, but they need specific mineral compositions. Thornak had done surveys, found deposits, made calculations about how long his preferred minerals would last. What he hadn't accounted for was that eating nothing but rocks for a month, even if you're biologically designed for it, is incredibly boring. On day 25, he watched Edith harvest vegetables from her garden, season them with herbs she'd cultivated from local plants, and cook them over her fire into what genuinely looked like a decent stir-fry. Her bird-lizard friend was sitting nearby, making happy chirping noises. The smell was apparently detectable even to Vulcarian senses. Thornak ate a boulder for dinner that night and questioned every life choice that had led him to this moment. Day 27. He admitted defeat. Not because he couldn't survive longer. He absolutely could have. But because, in his words, "If I have to eat one more granite deposit while watching the human eat actual seasoned food and enjoy herself, I will lose my mind. This is not survival. This is torture. I forfeit." The galaxy was stunned. Thornak the Enduring, from the same species that held the record, beaten not by the elements but by watching someone have a nicer time than him. Edith gave him a sympathetic pat on what might have been his arm, or possibly his shoulder. It was hard to tell with Vulcarians. "You did good, hun. Want some vegetables before you go? I've got plenty." He took them. He was not proud of this fact, but he took them, and later admitted in interviews that they were the best thing he'd eaten in 15 years of competitive training. So now it was day 28, and only 2 competitors remained. Vax the Eternal and Edith Kowalski. The tension, according to Rixel and Plune, was unbearable. The whole galaxy was watching. Betting pools had shifted dramatically. Vax was still the favorite, but Edith's odds had gone from 1 in 10,000 to nearly even money. Vax, to his credit, was unshakable. Crystalline beings don't really do doubt or worry. They exist, they persist, they endure. He'd been meditating on that ridge for 28 days, absorbing energy, completely zen, totally in the zone. Day 40 arrived. The record, 200 years of Vulcarian dominance, and here they were, tied with Gorath, the Unyielding's legendary achievement. The broadcast went to split screen, showing Vax in perfect meditation, and Edith teaching her bird lizard to play fetch with a small rock. Vax opened his crystalline eyes, stood up, and prepared his victory speech. He'd been composing it for weeks. Something profound about endurance, persistence, the nature of existence. Real philosophical stuff. He floated down from his ridge, positioning himself in front of the nearest camera drone. I, Vax the Eternal, have matched the legendary record. 40 days of perfect meditation, total harmony with the universe, absolute mastery over physical needs. This achievement represents the pinnacle of crystalline discipline and proves that consciousness, properly focused, can overcome any challenge. And now, having made my point, I choose to conclude this competition with dignity intact. I tap out. He paused for effect, waiting for the applause, the commentary, the acknowledgement of his profound wisdom and strategic genius. He'd tied the record, made a statement, and was leaving on his own terms like a champion. Except Edith didn't tap out. She didn't even notice it was day 40. She was too busy reinforcing the roof of her shelter because she'd noticed some wear on the corner and wanted to fix it before the structure degraded. The bird lizard was helping, or at least it thought it was helping. Mostly it was just getting in the way and making encouraging noises. Vax floated over to her campsite. Human. Edith. The record has been achieved. We have both reached 40 days. It is customary to withdraw now with honor. Edith looked up from her roof repair. Oh, is that today? Huh. Time flies when you're keeping busy. Yes. So. We both tap out now, share the victory. Very dignified. Very respectful. Why would I do that? Because the record is 40 days. We've reached it. That's the point. Honey, I'm not done yet. Not done with what? Edith gestured around her campsite. At her thriving garden, her improved shelter, her various projects in progress. All of this. I've still got that shawl to finish. I want to see if I can improve my water filtration system, and I think I can domesticate a few more of these bird lizards if I'm patient. Plus, I'm pretty sure I saw some clay deposits down by the dry creek bed, and I've been wanting to try my hand at pottery again. Haven't done that since the 80s. But the competition. What about it? It's over. The record is tied. Well, then I guess I'm breaking it, aren't I? Vax's crystalline form flickered with what might have been confusion, frustration, or possibly respect. The translation was unclear. You're just going to keep going? Unless there's some rule that says I can't? There was not. Nobody had ever needed that rule because nobody had ever wanted to stay longer than necessary to win. The entire point was to prove you could survive 40 days, not to actually enjoy yourself doing it. Vax floated there for a long moment, processing this absolutely baffling human logic. Then, with as much dignity as a sentient crystal could muster, he teleported back to the station, leaving Edith alone on Crag 7 with her garden, her bird lizard, and her extremely comfortable rocking chair. The galaxy lost its collective mind. Rixel stared at the camera. She's just staying. Plune checked the rulebook frantically. There's nothing that says she has to leave. The competition continues until all contestants withdraw, or until he paused. Reading further. Oh no. What? There's no upper time limit. We never needed one because nobody ever... This has never... Oh no. Day 41 began with Edith starting a new knitting project and wondering if she had time to build a greenhouse. So here's the thing about breaking a 200-year-old record that everyone assumed was basically unbreakable. The galaxy notices. And I don't mean like, oh, that's interesting. Casual notice. I mean full scale. Stop everything. What is happening? Call the Science Council. Check the simulation. Are we sure this is real-life kind of notice? Day 50. Edith had expanded her garden to include 3 separate plots with crop rotation and companion planting. The bird lizard she'd befriended had brought friends. She now had what could only be described as a small flock of semi-domesticated alien chickens that followed her around and ate bugs from her garden. She'd named them. The translation software gave up trying to render the names and just labeled them Bird 1 through Bird 7. The producers held an emergency meeting. What do? We can't just keep filming indefinitely. Why not? The ratings are incredible. We've got viewers from species that don't even normally watch survival content. The Andromedans are writing scholarly papers about her techniques. The crystallines are having a philosophical crisis about the nature of endurance versus enjoyment. But she's not struggling. She's not even... Look at day 53 footage. They pulled up the feed. Edith had built a crude but functional loom and was weaving plant fibers into cloth while humming. The bird lizards were arranged around her like an audience. She was giving them a running commentary on her process like she was hosting a crafting show. Now you want to make sure your tension is even, she was saying to the birds, who had no idea what she was talking about but seemed supportive anyway. Otherwise you get bunching, and nobody wants bunched fabric. My daughter-in-law tried to make curtains once without proper tension, and let me tell you, it was a disaster. Lovely girl. Cannot weave to save her life. One of the producers put their head in their hands. She's teaching textile arts to alien fauna on a death world. Day 70. Edith had pottery. Actual fired pottery. She'd found that clay deposit, dug it up, processed it, shaped it, and built a kiln using rocks and controlled fire. The galaxy's leading archaeologists were having heated debates about whether this constituted recreating the entire arc of civilization on an accelerated timeline. Edith just wanted bowls. She was tired of eating off flat rocks like some kind of animal. Day 90. The Galactic audience was fully invested. There were fan clubs. There was merchandise. There were Edith Kowalski motivational posters with slogans like, "If Grandma can build a homestead on a death world, you can finish your dissertation, and spite is a renewable resource." Betting pools had evolved. People weren't betting on when she'd leave anymore. They were betting on what she'd build next. Would she figure out irrigation? Would she make furniture? Would she somehow develop electricity? The odds on electricity were surprisingly good. Day 105. Edith's shelter was no longer a shelter. It was a cottage. A small, tidy, well-organized cottage, with a garden, a chicken coop for the bird lizards, a workshop area, and what appeared to be a porch. She sat on that porch every evening in her rocking chair, watching the sunset, sometimes knitting, sometimes just existing peacefully. Rixel and Plune had long since abandoned any pretense of serious commentary. Their broadcasts had become part nature documentary, part lifestyle show, part philosophical meditation on the human condition. Here we see Edith harvesting vegetables, Rixel narrated on day 112. Note the careful selection of only ripe produce, leaving younger plants to continue growing. This is sustainable agriculture, folks, on a planet where 3 months ago, 4 elite competitors were struggling to find drinkable water. She's labeled her days, Plune added, zooming in on a crude calendar Edith had carved into a rock. Laundry Monday, baking Tuesday, garden Wednesday, pottery Thursday, general maintenance Friday, free time Saturday and Sunday. She has a schedule. She has weekends. The science community was losing it. Xenobiologists couldn't explain how she domesticated an alien species so quickly. Psychologists were writing papers on human adaptability and stress response. Physicists were just confused because none of this seemed to violate any laws. It was just deeply improbable. Day 140. Edith's grandson finally got through on the emergency communicator. The producers had been trying to avoid interrupting, but families have rights, even in Galactic survival championships apparently. "Grandma, are you okay? We've been so worried." "Oh, hi, sweetie. I'm fine. This has been lovely. Very peaceful. I've lost about 15 pounds and my knee doesn't hurt anymore. Something about the gravity here, I think." "Grandma, you've been on an alien planet for almost 5 months. Has it been that long?" "Well, time flies when you're keeping busy. How's your mother?" She's worried about you." "Everyone is. The whole planet is watching. You're more famous than the president." "That's nice, dear. Listen, can you do me a favor and stop calling during my shows? I've got a radio working. Took me 3 weeks, but I figured it out. And I've been picking up these fascinating broadcasts from the nearest system. I don't understand the language, but the music is lovely." "You built a radio?" "Well, I had the parts. Anyway, sweetie, I need to go. It's Baking Tuesday and I'm trying a new recipe with these root vegetables I found. Love you. Say hi to your mother." She disconnected. Her grandson sat there, staring at the communicator, trying to process the fact that his grandmother had casually mentioned building a radio from scratch, like it was equivalent to trying a new casserole recipe. Day 160. The Galactic Council formally requested a meeting with Earth's representatives to discuss what they were calling the Kowalski phenomenon. Scientists wanted to study her. Anthropologists wanted to interview her. The tourism board wanted to know if all humans were like this, because if so, they needed to completely revise their safety protocols. Earth's representatives tried to explain that no, not all humans were like Edith. But also yes, kind of. It was complicated. Humans were adaptable. Humans were stubborn. Humans had this thing where if you told them something was impossible, they took it as a challenge. And human grandmothers specifically were a force of nature that defied conventional understanding. The council was not reassured. Day 170. Edith had bread. Somehow, impossibly, she had cultivated a grain-like plant, harvested it, processed it, and figured out wild yeast fermentation. She had bread, fresh-baked bread on a planet that barely supported microbial life. Plune tasted it. They'd sent a sample back for analysis. "It's good," he said, sounding betrayed by the universe. "It's actually good. It has herbs in it." "Of course it has herbs," Rixel replied, dead inside. "She has an herb garden. She has multiple gardens. She has an agricultural compound. At what point do we admit that she's not surviving? She's colonizing." Day 175. Edith started getting fan mail. The producers didn't know how to handle this. They set up a system where messages could be delivered via the camera drones. She got thousands. Marriage proposals from 17 different species. Requests for advice. Questions about her techniques. One very formal letter from the Vulcarian High Council apologizing for Thornak's dismissive comments and asking if she would consider teaching a master class. Edith read them in the evenings, sitting on her porch, Bird 3 perched on her shoulder. She seemed genuinely touched. "That's very sweet," she told the camera. "Tell them I said thank you, and remind everyone to drink enough water and call their mothers." The galaxy collectively fell in love with her. Day 180. The producers made a decision. They had to convince her to come home. Not because she was struggling, but because they literally didn't know what to do with a survival competition that had turned into a lifestyle show featuring a grandmother who'd accidentally started a homestead and become the most beloved figure in this galaxy. It took 3 days of negotiation to convince Edith to leave. Not because she was being difficult, but because she genuinely wanted to make sure her garden wouldn't die and that someone would take care of the bird lizards. The producers promised to establish a preservation zone. Her cottage would become a protected site. The bird lizards would be monitored by xenobiologists who were honestly just excited to study them. On day 183, Edith packed her things, gave each bird lizard a final pat, and took one last look at her cottage. She seemed genuinely sad to go. "This was nice," she told the camera. "Very restful. I might come back and visit sometime if that's allowed." The producers assured her that yes, absolutely, any time. They would literally build her a spaceship if she wanted. She returned to a hero's welcome. Not just on Earth, though Earth absolutely lost its mind. Parades, awards, the president called personally. But the entire galaxy celebrated. She'd broken the record by 143 days. 143 days. Gorath's legendary 40-day record looked cute in comparison. Edith was offered everything. Sponsorship deals worth billions. Speaking tours across the galaxy. Universities wanted to study her. Governments wanted to consult with her. There was a very serious proposal to make her the Galactic ambassador for human colonization efforts. She declined it all. Well, almost all. She accepted a lifetime supply of yarn from a textile company on Andromeda Prime, and she negotiated a better cruise package. The actual tropical vacation kind, with her family included. At the press conference, someone finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Edith, what's your secret? How did you do what no one else could?" Edith thought about it for a moment, adjusting her reading glasses. "Well, I wouldn't say I did anything special. I just kept myself busy and didn't complain too much. But if you want the honest truth, my mother-in-law once came to visit and stayed for 8 months straight. 8 months of listening to her opinions on how I raised my children, how I kept my house, how I cooked my pot roast. After surviving that, 6 months alone on a planet with nobody criticizing my life choices was practically a vacation." The room erupted in laughter. The galaxy finally understood. Humans weren't surviving through superior biology or advanced technology. They were surviving through spite, stubbornness, and the kind of perspective that only comes from dealing with difficult relatives. Edith went home to Montana. She started a garden, a normal Earth garden this time. She finished the shawl for her granddaughter. She gave exactly one interview to a local newspaper who seemed confused about why national outlets were so interested in their town's retired postal worker. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd sit on her porch in her rocking chair, look up at the stars, and think about her little cottage on Crag 7. The bird lizards were doing fine, according to reports. The garden was apparently still producing vegetables. Some scientists had asked permission to study the site, and she'd agreed as long as they didn't mess anything up. The Galactic Survival Championship continued, of course. But they added a new rule. The Kowalski Clause. A maximum time limit of 90 days. Because after Edith, they realized they needed one. No one wanted to risk another competitor deciding to just move in permanently. The record still stands. 183 days. Set by a 67-year-old grandmother from Montana who thought she was entering a raffle and ended up teaching the galaxy that sometimes the best survival strategy is just being too stubborn to quit and too practical to overcomplicate things. And if you ask Edith about it now, she'll just shrug and say it wasn't that big a deal. She's done harder things. And does anyone want some cookies? She just made a fresh batch.